Get in on the action and make your bet with Sports Interaction. Summer is heating up with baseball. Can the Jays make a run at the division?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Hey, but you can bet before the game, whichever way you think. Live and in play and all your favorite teams and hot dog contests. Woo! Woo! SportsInteraction.com/STPN or download the app to get started. It's 19 plus. And what do you have to do, Steve?
Please. Welcome to Nailing the Apex, everyone. I'm Tim Hauraney. Please head on over to Spotify, give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same goes with Apple Podcasts as well. Rate and reviews. It really helps us grow the show. You can also watch us on YouTube now as well. You can follow me on social media at Tim Hauraney. Joining me today is Mark Dailey from the Scuderia F1 Pod. Mark, you've got last time I saw you, you did not have a beard and your hair was not like jet slicked back.
Yeah, well, I just had a shower, so that that it hasn't quite dried, and I guess the beard thing, well, I guess you can tell what I did over the summer break. Yeah, something I wanted to try. So there you go.
And how is that coming along? How is that working out for you?
It's going pretty good. It's not that I was I'll full disclosure here. Like I could probably go several days without like shaving, so it's been a bit glacial in terms of how long it's taken this thing to grow, but at least now that when I had to shave like maybe twice a week, that's down to no times a week. So now but it's I like the look. What
happens when you get like do you get like food caught in that thing?
No, because I'm not a messy eater. I try not to be.
It'd be all over my friggin' face. I'd just be wearing it, man. There's just no way. I couldn't pull it off either. I wouldn't suit it, I don't think. Okay, so regardless of facial hair, we're here to talk about some Formula One. So yeah, Dutch Grand Prix. Your thoughts, Daily, just on the race. I mean, I really liked it. Obviously, there's a ton of chaos. I'm into it. So, yep. We all thrive on it sometimes when it comes to Formula One, but actually, in my opinion, this was probably one of the better races I've seen so far this season.
Yeah, it's going to be misleading, right? When you just look at if you didn't watch the race and you just look at the final race classification, Max won again. He earned that W today. I mean, that was a crazy race. And, I'll just set a little bit of context. I used to live in the Netherlands. I lived there for, like most of my early 20s. I didn't live in or work in Zandvoort. I actually worked in Utrecht, which is about, I'd say 50 miles to the southeast as the crow flies. But where it kind of ties into it, it's all in the North Sea. The Netherlands is absolutely flat. I live in Vancouver. We got lots of mountains here. So if the bad weather comes in off the Pacific, it parks on the mountains and it stays there for like a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And the bad weather that comes in off of the North Sea, it will blow through, because I remember plenty of times when I was over there that, I remember one time when I was at work and I worked in a big office tower. It was a beautiful sunny day and out of nowhere it went like pitch black and you could feel like the wind buffering the building and this torrential downpour. So when I saw earlier this week that there's the potential for rain on Saturday and Sunday, it's like, oh man, I hope it comes to pass, because that could really spice things up. And I didn't expect it to get that spicy, but it was good. I loved the chaos. It was great.
Yeah, so the rain off the top, everyone, if you didn't see it, just the opening laps of the race, it just dumps down rain. So that
was bizarre. They left for the formation lap. It was dry. They go back around like 3 minutes later at the end of the opening lap, and it's like a swimming pool.
It was awesome.
It was great.
Absolutely loved it. So obviously there were some cars that pitted out of sequence, and we'll touch on some of those cars a little bit later that eventually factored into the race thanks to that strategy of getting into the pits early. But some of these drivers being left out there just a little bit too long on those slick tires, Lance Stroll being one of them, who we can touch on later as well. But I would say for Max Verstappen, and I think you said it well off the top, that this was one of the more impressive wins that I've seen him pull off. When, Daily, you consider the different situations that he had to overcome, racing in the rain on slick tires, racing on intermediates on a damp, then drying track, trying to undercut your teammate at the same time, then getting rained on again. He was friggin' awesome, man. It was pretty incredible to see what he could do today.
Yeah, and I keep trying to say this on our own show that, okay, sure, especially when people say, oh, it's boring when Max wins all the time. It's like, the guy is driving at such an incredibly high level, and he hasn't just done it for like a couple of races. He's been doing it now for a couple of years, and especially like today when it was basically, okay, well, who knows what it's going to be like at the end of this lap? Forget what it's going to be like, 20, 30 minutes down the road. It was pretty cool to see, because I mean, it seemed like everybody had a little bit of an incident at some point, and it's just amazing. And the thing I love too is like especially when you get like those in-car cameras, and I spent a lot of time like following Lewis and Lando when they were behind Yuki there for a while. Mm-hmm. It's great just to kind of like follow around for like extended periods of time, because it's kind of like it's a very compact track, but it's got a great flow to it, and especially when you're following along like in the cockpit, like you can really get in the groove. It was cool.
Yeah, I think like, a lot of the drive, I mean, you saw it with Logan Sargent, unfortunately, when he had crashed in qualifying, on Saturday. And you saw just like the margins, and there wasn't much margin with this racetrack, and there never really has been. I remember in this race in particular, just watching how fine the margins were with the racing line. And if, Max in particular, or I'll use Fernando because I was riding on board with him for quite a bit of the race, just putting the tire on one of the curbs, if it was damp or wet, and then also just getting the tire onto one of those white lines, it really screws your race, because it's so easy with these cars now. If you just make the smallest of errors, these cars just bite so much now. And for Max to have to, manage all of that and win a Grand Prix with all of the other things that I had mentioned he kind of had to deal with, I mean, it just kind of shows you what level this guy's, operating at. And I think there's only a few drivers on the grid who, if you put them in that same car, they could maybe keep up, right? Mm-hmm. There's only a few. There's not many. I wouldn't say that the entire grid could keep up with what Verstappen's doing right now. There's no way. I just think what we're watching is really special at the moment.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, it's unusual and it's unique when you get that combination of the best driver and the best car with the best power unit. Yeah. I mean, these are complex machines, and because like Max was saying this week that he really feels like he unpackaged the potential in this car way back at Baku several months ago. And I mean, he was already been obviously doing pretty good, but he feels that even though he didn't win that race, that what he was able to learn from the car and how to set up that car at that point has really benefited him in every race since. And I was kind of thinking, it's like, wow, that's an interesting admission or statement by Max, because I kind of felt that he's been on it right since the lights turned green way back at the start of the year, but to kind of get that when we're already a third of the way through the season, when he's kind of admitting, or he's telling us that straight up, that this is when I really figured out the car. Mm-hmm. Because I've always felt that they're not really pushing the car to its full potential. I mean, it's been great. I mean, that RB19 is something special, but I still feel like there's more that they could uncork from this one.
I think so too. For certain parts, I think we've seen in qualifying in particular, Max actually really, really pushed. I think we've saw pretty close to what that car can do, maybe in Hungary and a tiny bit in Spa. I think they had to change the floor around, the ride height a bit in Spa, because I think they were wearing out the plank too much going through Eau Rouge, Radillon, so we didn't actually really see them at full potential at a track like that. And I think once we get to Monza, we will. I think in Monza, we will probably have a better understanding of what is actually inside that car. That's a big power track, long straightaways, heavy braking zones, few chicanes, nothing really, really too high speed in terms of corners. We already saw what they could do there. We saw that at the British Grand Prix. We've seen glimpses of what the car can do, but I think outright speed and pace, I think we'll probably see that come the Italian Grand Prix. Let's talk about this undercut that obviously Red Bull initiated on one of their own drivers. Verstappen undercutting his teammate Sergio Perez in this race. I mean, it sounds like the team were worried about Alonso, who had at that point, gone on to slicks, and they were worried about having two cars, first and fourth, coming out from that pit stop. I think they were also quite surprised how quickly, Max ended up catching Checo. And you heard it on the radio when Sergio was like, "Did Max just undercut us?"
Yeah, the tone of his voice was incredible, right? It was just like he was astounded, he was astonished. It's just like, Max, how did this happen?
Yeah.
It's like basically was what the tone of Checo's voice was, right?
It just shows you just how on the limit Verstappen was today. I mean, even the team, once they saw the data of how fast he was actually coming out from his stop, like they couldn't believe it, and he ended up just undercutting Sergio altogether. Checo's penalty that he had gotten towards the end of the race when he came in before the red flag had been thrown out, he obviously banged into the wall, and then the pit lane speed limit penalty that he got, he was 0.8, I think it was 0.8 miles an hour or kilometers an hour, so one or the other over, and that's what gave him the 5-second time penalty and allowed Pierre Gasly to take that final podium paying position. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think for a driver like Sergio, this seems like it was a pretty rough weekend.
Yeah, especially when, that chaos that we saw in the opening laps. Checo was like the first person into the pits to go on to inters, and he was just flying out there. It was just like, I was sitting there watching that, and I was just like, wow, that was a great call to get him in, get him onto inters literally before everyone else. And he was just absolutely flying. I was just like, maybe this is going to be Sergio's day. Maybe he upsets the storyline here, and maybe a Red Bull still wins at Zandvoort, but it's not going to be the home guy, the hometown boy, right? It's going to be his teammate. So it sure didn't turn out that way. Like the undercut, then like hitting the wall, the penalty. I mean, then he finishes just off the podium. So it wasn't as horrible as some of the other weekends that he's had, like earlier in the summer, kind of late in the spring, that were pretty, they were real low points, right? It's just got to be frustrating because it was there for him at one point.
If you take a look at Saturday's qualifying, and you look at the gap, the lap delta between Max and Sergio, it was 1.3 seconds.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. I mean, it's just, you have to sort of just like say that and let it kind of sit there for a second, let it kind of sink in. 1.3 seconds. It's amazing, right? Because I mean, Max is on pole. His teammate, qualifies in seventh. I mean, that is just an absolute. That's like a Grand Canyon of times. I mean, it's not like a little delta. That's a massive delta.
Oh, it's huge. Like I look, granted, I understand. I've said this before on this podcast a few times in the past few months that, the car definitely being developed away from what Sergio does. Look, I get that. I understand that. But as a driver who's been in Formula One for as long as Sergio has the experience that he has, the gap, that delta, should not be 1.3 seconds. That is huge.
It's massive, right? I'm just looking at the times right now. So Checo's Q3 time was a 1:11.880. Max's was a 1:10.567. Yeah. Massive. But then you go and look at like Lando, who qualified second next to Max on row one. His Q3 time was 1:11.104. So I mean, there's almost 0.6 of a second between pole and second on the starting grid. I mean, that was just an incredible lap that Max threw down. But it's even more incredible that Sergio is that much further behind. Although, I mean, be it that the conditions and the track was evolving over that session because it rained beforehand and was drying out. I mean, you can, maybe he uses that to a certain extent to, I don't know, excuse or justify his time, but I don't know. That's, I don't know if it's too much, right? I don't think you can make too many excuses about that, people are going to be like, okay, sure, whatever.
Same car too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it.
But it's interesting. Like during the weekend, Helmut Marko had spoken with German media claiming that, Perez's seat at the team for next season wasn't 100% sure. And then following the race in Zandvoort on Sunday, Christian Horner did confirm that Perez would hold on to his seat for 2024. Saying, quote, Checo's situation for next year is clear. He's a Red Bull driver, and we have an agreement with him. And irrelevant of agreements, we're pleased with the job that he is doing. I mean, look, Dailey, I don't like to dump on drivers. I really don't. But in this case, what happens, and I've said this on the show again, you guys are going to keep hearing it, but next season, these teams are going to close the gap, man. They are. Look at McLaren. When we talk about closing the gap between the fastest car on the grid and McLaren being one of, if not the slowest on the grid, they clawed back over a second of performance in the span of 6 months. What the hell do you think these teams are going to do in the offseason? They're going to make huge improvements. Like, this gap is going to narrow, is going to close. And what do you do when you've got, Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso breathing down your neck and you're Max Verstappen, and you've got nobody separating yourself from those two drivers?
Yeah, and you raise a couple really good points there, right? And we should just maybe emphasize that power units are frozen, so you don't need to worry about spreading your workforce, across all these. You can just focus on building a car. And even in this cost cap era, and I know that the results aren't really reflective of what McLaren has done, just because, they got kind of caught up in, they got caught out there during those opening laps and didn't go to Inter soon enough. But to have, Lando qualifying in second, Oscar Piastri obviously looks like he's the real deal. I mean, he qualified in eighth, which is pretty good for a track he's probably never been at before. And everybody's gunning for Red Bull now. And so when I hear these comments from Marko that, oh, well, maybe his seat's not safe, and Horner saying, oh, his seat's safe, I know that when it comes to Formula One, it's a completely different thing, but if we just go to talk about basketball now, or football, or hockey, or baseball, whenever you hear those comments, from the general manager, the team president, is like, we're going with him, that's our guy. That's usually the kiss of death. And I don't want to jinx Checo. I don't want to, because that's been a tough seat for every single driver, from Danny Ricciardo to Sergio Perez and everybody in between, to come in and fill that number 2 seat beside Max Verstappen. And we know that that Red Bull, they will make a change, and they will do it when they see fit. They don't mind if it's in the middle of a season. It's just this is what we got to do. We're going to do it now, and whatever. If nobody likes it, that's not our problem.
But interesting, those comments coming, on the heels of Ricciardo, fracturing his left hand, getting an operation. He's got a steel plate in there now. He's not going to be competing at the Italian Grand Prix. I doubt Daniel Ricciardo is back for Singapore either. And as a team, I don't think you're going to get a good understanding of where Daniel Ricciardo is now, simply because you're losing those races, you're losing all of that data, even though he did look actually pretty good in the free practice sessions that he did take part in this weekend before injuring himself. But yeah, I just find it really fascinating that Horner says all that stuff when Ricciardo has this injury. But that being said, I think for Daniel Ricciardo, it's probably more along the lines of them thinking about him for that seat for 2025. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what they're looking down the pipeline. Maybe we see Danny Ricciardo driving an AlphaTauri again next year. I mean, I think that Dan's done a pretty good job in the couple of races he did before the summer break. Unfortunately, we only just saw some practice times before he had his accident. What a freak accident that was! Yeah. But just judging from what I'm hearing, and despite the fact that he went to the same doctor that helped Lance out after he had that cycling crash, I'm just gonna do that. Yeah, yeah. I was just like, okay, well, I'm just kind of getting the vibes now that the injury, the break that Danny has in his hand is got to be like a magnitude worse than what happened to Lance, because Lance was back like in a couple of weeks, and he probably sucked it up and played Canadian, and just like played a little bit hurt, maybe came back a little bit more quicker than he should have. And you can't fault a guy, but I just have a feeling that Dan's going to be out a little bit longer than Lance was.
Yeah, I think so too. Fernando Alonso is a absolute weapon. Like,
right?
What a legend. He's just a machine, dude. Finishing P2 in this one. Got a story for you. So turn 3, I don't know if you remember this, but turn 3, the first lap. Do you remember Alonso's pass that he had there? He went. Yeah,
everybody goes high, he goes low.
He was the only one. He was the only driver to do that. So during the wet weather practice sessions, during one of his out laps, he let a few cars go by him during the wet practice session, and he tried going down the inside of turn 3 to see if he could pass cars there and if there was any grip. So he thought that everyone was going to be a bit cautious in turn 3 at the start of this race, and he was thinking about the inside line and he made up some places. So he threw the car down there, right? And he made up, like, I think it was like 2 places or something like that. It was a pretty big pass. But he said during the press conference on Sunday that he said it should be it should be the overtake of the month. That's what he said.
Well, the old saying, go big or go home, right? I mean,
what a legend.
Oh yeah, that was great. It was funny too, because I was watching that fight between Yuki and Lando and Lewis for the longest time, and it was just like Lando just couldn't get quite close enough to Yuki to really make like a serious maneuver to pass him. And then he get within to about half a second, and Lewis would be close to about a half a second behind Lando. And then it becomes like a little bit academic, because Lando goes into the pits to change tires, and then Lewis goes into the pits to change tires, and then Fernando, he goes into change for his scheduled pit stop, and they have that problem with the left front, so he has this really, really slow stop. So Yuki goes by, Carlos goes by. I would say they were mobile chicanes, but they were guys that that they're kind of finding themselves in these battles and these DRS trains and things like that. Fernando came by and dispatched those guys within a couple of laps. So it's just like, wow, it's just like it just demonstrated just like how good he was driving, but also just the difference between the Aston Martin and everyone else. So it's just like, there's no big, it's like Fernando's like, no biggie.
He's take care awesome, of business. Man. I mean, during that red flag period, he told us that he spent like the entire time thinking about how he could get the win and get Verstappen. So he spoke with the team about it, and they said, go for it. They were telling him, go for it. So on the restart, the final corner there, Dailey, how it's like kind of banked, and then it comes onto the straightaway. Okay, so like that corner, that's like flat out, right, dude? Like that's fast. And in the wet, I can only imagine just how sketchy it could be, because you have rain that's actually coming down the track because it's kind of banked, right? And so that makes it even worse, because you get like these running rain puddles almost that kind of drip down from the track, and they're really, really difficult to navigate. So he said on the restart he tried to be flat out through there in the banking with cold tires, which is a huge risk. Huge. That's a massive risk, dude. But the team allowed him to do it. and he was trying to be side by side heading down into turn one with Max, but couldn't pull anything off. But then he started to try different lines to find more grip, and Max eventually opened up just enough of a gap. But yeah, he felt that it was close. It just wasn't close enough. I'm just impressed with how much this driver works a race weekend. When you're planning for wet weather for the race and you're looking at different lines and you're seeing like, where else can you put the car? Let's try it here in practice. So, if this happens in the race, I have the wherewithal to know that there's some grip here and I can pass cars here. Like, just, he's the only one. And I think like that's when you look at these really, really great drivers. He's like, those are those little small margins, I think, that separates all of them.
Totally. I mean, back in the day, I mean, the nickname for Alain Prost was the Professor, because he did the same sort of thing. I mean, not just like Fernando, multiple world champion, an exceptionally good, Formula One driver, an exceptionally good racing driver, but very much like the two of them would look at like all these little things. It's like, where can I gain an advantage? Like what can I use to my benefit? It's cool to see when you see somebody putting the work in like that, and then they can they've got all these extra tools and all these things that they can pull out of their toolkit like over the course of a race. It was awesome, because it's just like, when I saw that, it's just like, he just didn't do what I think he did. I had to stop it and like watch that again. I'm just like, okay, that's kind of an unorthodox line through there, but it's very cool. Yeah, it's great to see. I mean, and his age too. I mean, he's at an age where he should be, sitting in the commentary box. He should be sitting at home. He should be retired. But I mean, he's driving at such an incredibly good level, and he's not just there to like pad his retirement fund. He's there to race. He's there to score as many wins and podiums and everything that he can. And it's just and I don't want to take it too much away from Red Bull and the job that they've done, but again, it's too bad that they're so dominant, because I think in any other season, if that gap between Red Bull and everyone was closer, I think Fernando would have had a win by now. But it's just that Max and Red Bull have just been that much better than everyone else. But it was cool. It was great to watch him this weekend. Yeah,
it was awesome. Aston Martin obviously bringing some upgrades to the car, and they were big upgrades too. So they brought a new floor, a lot of floor components. They brought a new diffuser. For those of you who don't know, these are components that are underneath the car, but what they do is they bring massive amounts of performance, because that's where a lot of the performance now lays with these regulation of race cars. So they're happy about the direction that the upgrade has gone in, the data that they got back from it, because I heard from the team throughout the weekend, and Fernando's happy with how things went too. Same with Lance. He's happy with the upgrades as well. And I think for this team, it's a positive sign moving forward, Dailey, because they have more budget. They still have budget left. They haven't hit the cost cap yet. And they can keep developing this car hard, which is a positive, I think, for them. And it's a positive also for Fernando Alonso, who, if you want to take away second in the Drivers' Championship from Sergio Perez, this is what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just looking at the Constructors' Championship. Red Bull, of course, is way out there, like over 250 points ahead of Mercedes, who are at second. So you still got that 40-point delta between Mercedes and Aston Martin, the constructors. The most important thing is, I guess, that they didn't cede more ground to Ferrari. I mean, Ferrari only brought one car home. Well, I mean, Aston Martin, of course, only had one car in the points today as well. But when you look at the Drivers' Championship, that's where it gets interesting, right? I mean, Max is going to win. And I mean, he's going to do it easily. But I mean, Sergio's got 201 points, Fernando 168. But we're coming into this kind of interesting sort of stretch run in the season, because it kind of had to sink into my mind after this race today, because this was Fernando's first podium since Montreal back at what was that, the middle of June?
Oh yeah,
it's like 2.5 months ago, and of course we had the summer break in there in between. It's just like they were all like, I remember at the time, like Fernando and Lance talking that they were really excited about the new upgrade package that they were going to throw in the car for that weekend, and then the upgrades actually kind of set them back, and it's taken them this time to kind of claw back. So it was good to see Fernando, where he was. I must admit, I was a little bit concerned because, the P5, in qualifying, I was like, that's not great, but not horrible either. It's a row 3 kind of, you could work with it kind of thing, right? But it's just like, let's see what happens when we get to the race itself. And the car looked good when it was dry, looked good when it was wet. Fernando obviously was in the zone today, so it was good for him. But, unfortunately for him, he was the only Aston Martin driver to bring points home. I mean, Lance, finishing well out of the not well out of the points. He came home P11. So unfortunately, it's just like you got that big spread again between Fernando, and it just seems that every time there seems to be something different. It's not one consistent problem that I seem to notice with Lance, but the end result is the same, is that Fernando's bringing home the lion's share of the points in the constructors, and Lance isn't. And then it seems like every weekend there's something else that kind of, causes him grief to, and it must be frustrating, right?
Yeah. Well, for free practice 1, he didn't get any laps. So he didn't even drive the track because they had engine problems with his car. And then once we got into qualifying, like in free practice 2, he actually was pretty decent. In qualifying, he was good up until Q2. He overheated the intermediate tire that he was running, and that's what forced him to qualify where he was. There was no life left in the tire to push it through to Q3, and then get into the race. And so instead of the team like pitting him when they probably should have, and they admitted to this as well, they ended up losing over, I think it was like over a minute, to leaving Lance out as long as they did. And that right there, ruins your race. He was dead last. He was dead last. He was like 20 seconds back of the car in front or something like that. It was around like 20 seconds, I think it was. And then eventually clawed back quite a bit of that gap and somehow found himself in the midst of scoring a point. I mean, yeah. So good drive to get as far as he did, but yeah.
Well, it's just like they were talking about it. They weren't specifically talking about it about Lance Stroll on Sky, but Karun Chandok was talking about one of the other drivers, could have been one of the McLaren guys, who the same thing. They just waited too long to switch on to the inters, and he was saying something to the effect of, it's like a 21 seconds you're going to lose for a pit stop at Zandvoort. The delta between the dry tires and the inters was something like 7 or 8 seconds per lap. So if you stay out 3 or 4 laps, you've already lost that that window. So you can see where he lost like a minute. I mean, it sounds absurd. It sounds like obscene that like a driver at that level would lose that much time. But when you look at the bigger picture and then just the difference and the conditions, it's like, oh yeah, like losing a minute and like in that situation, it's easy. It could happen.
You ruined the whole race is ruined, right? It's over. There's nothing else you can do. Like
maybe it was George then, because George, he came on the race radio and he was really frustrated with something. I was projected for a podium, and then all the bleeps came, and it's just like, how did we get to where we were? I mean, he was tooling around to like P17 or P18 or something. Yep. I mean, he was way at the back as well. So
I think like Alex Albon was one of the only ones to really get that one right, and he was able to just hold on and score some points. And I think like for Alex, like he finished P8, and for Alex, like he's been awesome all weekend. Dailey, his qualifying is incredible. He's doing things with that car that I don't think he can really do. I mean, even though he said this is the best the car has ever felt, but again, trying to pull that strategy off, he was one of the only ones who really could pull that strategy off. Watching some of his onboard, because I was riding on board with him at the start of the race, and I've said this before, he's got the quickest set of hands that I've ever seen on a racing driver. And that's one of the reasons I think why he's so fast in that Williams. And that's also why he was able to do what he did today, just simply because of his natural gift of having such great car control. Like, he has got incredible car control.
Yeah. I don't want this to come across like worse than it sounds, but I kind of feel bad that he's almost wasted in a Williams, because until they're able to bring that car up to a more competitive standard, I mean, I think it just goes to show like how good of a guy, like, or how good of a driver Alex Albon is. And it's just unfortunate because, I mean, he's one of those people that got kind of caught up in the Red Bull revolving door, but I really commend him for just deciding to make a clean break from the whole Red Bull like organization, even if it meant taking a backward step to an emerging team. Let's call them an emerging team in Williams. I mean, they got some good people. I mean, James Voles, I think, is the right person to be running that team now. And I think that, when you get like people like James Voles there, you get like a driver like Alex Albon in a car, which the Williams obviously is not the most competitive car on the grid, but, you put it in somebody's, capable hands of somebody like Alex Albon. I don't think it's unusual that occasionally we're going to see him put it in the points. I think that's just a credit to the type of driver and, the skills that he has.
Pierre Gasly, P3. In this one, great job from Pierre. I mean, obviously he did not go with the Aston Martin Lance Stroll strategy where the team left him out and losing a minute of track time. But aside from that, Pierre obviously working out great for him was the fact that Sergio got that penalty promoting him up into P3. But I guess it's his first Grand Prix podium of the season. He's had a sprint race podium, but he hasn't had a big race podium. And here we are. I think the results, obviously, Dailey, they're coming on the heels of Otmar Safnauer, Alan Permain being let go, and then Chief Technical Officer Pat Fry also leaving to go to Williams. And I think Gasly, for him, he feels that the team is heading in the right direction and falling into place within the team. And he thinks that this result may come down to the fact that, I think that this result may come down to the fact that, he was one of the first to pit for those intermediate tires off the hop.
Yeah, and it paid off for him because I can't remember how many like places did he make up off the beginning there at the start of the race, but it was quite a bit because Pierre, I mean, he qualified in 12th. I mean, so to finish in P3, I mean, it was just a great afternoon, and it was a double points finish for Alpine because Esteban came home in P10, so that's a nice little haul of points for them, which has been a pretty dark season for them. And, I don't know, just sort of like, to sort of sidetrack the conversation a little bit from Pierre, but keep it under the Alpine discussion. It just, that old saying that too many chefs spoil the broth. I just kind of, that's like when I look at that team, I just feel like everybody's got their finger in something. It's just like, and it just seems to have been like a mess, but it's just like the whole thing from like Laurent Rossi throwing like Otmar and everybody under the bus, and then him being reassigned to like, what was it? Special duties as
special operations,
as Hammy said, he's at HQ counting staples in the supply room or something, and then getting rid of Otmar and everything. Is just like, oh man, this team just and it's frustrating because this is a team that should be a contender, right? I mean, Renault is a major car manufacturer. This team has the budget, they have the knowledge, and it's just like, oh man, it's just like every time Ferrari seems to do something bad, it's like Alpine's like, hang on, Ferrari, hold my beer.
Speaking of Ferrari,
speaking of which,
Carlos Sainz finishing P5. Dailey, I mean, when this weekend started, they were nowhere to be found, man. Like, they were so far off the pace, it wasn't even funny. I think for Ferrari, for me, seeing what happened to this team this weekend was just shocking, man. Like, absolutely shocking. Leclerc retiring with floor damage. Mm-hmm. And watching his post-race interview on Sky Sports, he looked pissed.
Yeah, but that's almost become like the default,
But I've talked to Charles before, like in the pit, in the post-race, and like he's always been like, pretty easy to talk to, and like I knew at some points when he would be upset, but he handled things quite well. But just that interview, just the look on his face, like he looked pissed, man.
But it seems to be like the story of his whole Ferrari career. I mean, that season that he had with Sauber, whatever they were at the time, and then he gets the Ferrari drive, and it was pretty apparent right from the very first race that he was going to be quicker than Seb. Right. There's kind of like the team orders. Then we go to Bahrain. It was pretty obvious that this guy was going to win the race. He was going to beat the Mercedes. And Mercedes were at their apex. And what was that, 2018? Yep. And then a couple of laps from the end of the race, bits start falling off of his car. You get like this young, fresh, eager guy. And it's just like, it's like these things just kind of like keep happening again. And there was like, the way that the car, the team, or himself seems to let him down at his home race in Monaco. That's kind of become like a thing that's like his own personal curse. And it's just like, it's just like frustrated Charles. It's just like, I don't know. I don't feel like that's his default setting. He just kind of seems like a really chill, relaxed, happy kind of person. And I feel like Ferrari's ruining him,
Had to drive 14 hours to get the Zandvoort for this weekend. He had an ear infection as well, so he couldn't fly.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So, and then just the team itself not being ready to service him when he came in for intermediates. They weren't even ready for him with the tires. And I was like, what do we do? Like, what are we doing here? Good.
Yeah, but like the incredible thing was, didn't they say that Charles made the call himself? I'm just like, well, shouldn't it have been obvious to like everybody else wearing red?
It's raining, man. Like
exactly.
It's freaking raining. Of course you're gonna need the tires. Like, just get it ready. Like everyone else was ready.
Yeah, I know. His pit stop, resembled my visit to the Starbucks drive-thru yesterday afternoon. It's just like kind of going there, sitting there, twiddling my thumbs. I get my coffee and then I kind of drive away. But, at least when I went to the Starbucks, my coffee was ready. Charles pulled into the pits. They didn't even have his tires out there. So, Starbucks, they get 10 out of 10 on the service for my coffee visit. But, Ferrari, boy, just, it's ongoing though, Tim. That's the thing. It's just like it seems like it's just not this year, it's just not last year. This is like this multi-year thing. It's just like I feel like it's become like generational ineptitude.
I've had these thoughts lately, especially this weekend really hammered them home, that you let go of Mattia Binotto. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. All right. I mean, I didn't agree with it. I mean, I understand, like, heads have got to roll and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't agree with that move, Dailey. I really didn't. And then you bring in Frederick Vasseur. Okay, sure, fine. Yep, all right. And then you were thinking, like, okay, well, internally there needs to be some restructuring for sure. Strategic department definitely needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see how poorly they started the season. And you see the concept that they decided to stick with for this car. And then, you get to Spain and the car is totally different. They decide to go in a different direction with their aero philosophy. Now, granted, I do understand that, those parts are getting made back in like January, February, right? Like that are going to be unleashed during the Spanish Grand Prix in May. So those are things that are in the pipeline. Like I get that. But why wouldn't you fast track something like that back in November, December of last year And then Charles Leclerc on Thursday saying that, they don't think they're going to be able to catch Red Bull because of the advantage that Red Bull has until 2026 when there's a regulation change. And I'm thinking, maybe like Ferrari won't be able to catch Red Bull because of like
Mercedes might, Aston Martin might, McLaren might, a lot of other teams might be able to close that gap, but they probably won't be one of them. But, it's just like, what is the question? Like, why is this happening? Tim, it comes down to leadership, right? Sure. Okay. If they wanted to part ways with Binotto or Arriva Bene or Domenicali or whoever it is, or if they've mutually parted ways or whatever, fine. But the thing is when they parted the ways with Mattia Binotto, it wasn't the day after Abu Dhabi. It wasn't the week after Abu Dhabi. It was like during the middle of the off season. Then you're bringing in Fred Vasseur like into a program when he's probably already overseen the development of the Alfa Romeo for 2023. Of course, you're going to jump at that opportunity to go and become team principal at Ferrari. I mean, who wouldn't? But so it's just, I don't know. It's just like there's no leadership or structure. And I mean, like eventually you can't just keep blaming the Arriva Benes, the Binottos, the whoever, the team principals. Yes, they're all culpable and responsible for all that, but eventually it comes down to the people that are up a step on the pay scale above them. And that's ultimately where it is, because I mean, they either come in and, put all the pieces in place or whatever. I don't know. It's just a mess. It's not all at the lands at the doorstep of the team principal. Not anymore. We're beyond that conversation. It's expanded. Yeah. It's getting bigger.
I mean, this is a team, right? This is a legendary team. So as a kid, this was the team that I, loved, right? Like I still do, man. Like when I got my opportunity to do some, work for the car brand back in the day, like that was huge for me. Like I just cannot believe that this is where they are at, this moment, considering the season they had last year. And yeah, you know what? Part of it was a disaster at some points, for sure. Did Charles Leclerc make mistakes? Yes. Did the team make mistakes? Absolutely. But like, how did they go backwards so much? That's where I'm kind of at. And it's frustrating because when you see a Formula One team like do well, then you project for them to have another step for the next year. And now not to have that next step, it's just, man, it's hard to watch.
It is, especially when you're looking at like a team like Ferrari. And okay, well, you've had the big three that are Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. Red Bull, they've been in the ascendancy over the past couple of years. Mercedes didn't get it right coming into 2022. Neither did Ferrari. But I think what's concerning for them is, okay, Mercedes seem to slowly be turning this thing around. It's taken a while, but they're trending in the right direction.
Yes.
I think that's fair to say.
Yep.
But, the other thing is like, from their point of view, like this year, I'd be like, where the hell did Aston Martin come from? And all of a sudden, halfway through the 2023 World Championship, it was like, where the heck did McLaren just come from? And I know that when you look at like the Constructors Championship, there's what, 40 points between Aston and Ferrari. It's just like, if they can, if Aston Martin's got like was trending in the right direction again, if Lance can start putting some results together, that gap's going to open, because at this point, I've got way more faith in what Aston Martin's going to do on the track than what Ferrari does. I have literally no confidence in this team anymore.
And it's tough too, right? Because if you think if you think of the infrastructure, if you think of the personnel that are working there, if you think of the drivers, like the talent that they actually have here, and then you look at like how has it gotten, so, complicated and difficult, and how did it get to where it is now? Because it's not that they don't have like resources. It's not that they don't have talent, right? Like they have all of these things, and they're still recruiting. And they're recruiting even more talent. Like they're trying to get even more talent in the front door. And so it's, and the thing with F1 is like, it's not like everything is such a fast fix and things turn around really fast. It takes years, right? Like it's like, you're always planning like 2 years ahead, and you're always looking at how this team okay, yes, Frederick Vasseur comes in. That's a tiny bit of a step back, but the amount of the step that the car has taken back is unbelievable. Like I just, yeah, it's like I'd already said, it's difficult to watch because I really want this team to do well at some point. Because I'd love to see, and that's the other thing about Formula One, right? Ferrari is, a huge part of Formula One. It's like the NHL with the Toronto Maple Leafs, right?
Yep.
Or the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys, or the MLB with the New York Yankees.
Absolutely. And it's just like, it's an iconic brand.
Yes.
It's an iconic mark. It's just like,
yeah, good word.
Every kid when you're growing up is like, when I grow up and I'm rich, I'm buying a Ferrari.
Yeah.
We're all grown up. None of us are rich and none of us have a Ferrari, but that's another story. But I just wanted, just before we kind of move on here, I just wanted to say, just like, I think that, despite everything else going on, I think that for Carlos Sainz to finish 5th today, I think for him is an extremely good result.
Yeah, I agree.
Because that was, a very difficult. I mean, he had Lewis breathing down his neck right at the end of the race there, and he managed to keep in front of him. And Carlos kind of flies under the radar. I don't think he gets as much respect or recognition as he does.
Yeah,
I mean, Charles,
I agree with that too.
Like his potential future world champion, and Carlos, never, that conversation's never really, followed him anywhere, but he's a hardworking guy. He's a good driver. And despite all the other turmoil in that team, I think for him, he can walk away from this race with his head held high. I think that was a good result for him.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, definitely well said. So that's a good point. I think like even as they move on to Monza, I think they may have more, better results, I should call it, at Monza, their home race next weekend coming up. Mercedes having a difficult race this weekend. Kind of seems like they felt that they were close to Red Bull on pace at some points in this race. Lewis Hamilton coming home 6th, but Toto Wolff at the end of this one, just basically saying that they got the strategy completely wrong and stayed out way too long. Lewis doing a great job of getting this team into the points. At one point when I thought like, hey, I don't know if even George Russell or Lewis Hamilton are going to be in the points here.
Yeah. It's funny too, when you kind of look at it, I mean, it was a pretty tough weekend for everybody considering like the conditions that they were all, I mean, they all had to face it. They were all dealing with exactly the same thing. It's just that, you look at like Pierre Gasly, he had an exceptionally good race and an exceptionally good result. Fernando had a good weekend. Max obviously had a great weekend and a great results winning it, but they all had to work for it. But I thought it was good too, because, Toto, he's not afraid to call it like it is.
Yeah.
And just basically said, we screwed it up and we didn't do what needed to be good. So I found it refreshing, and I was pleased to hear it from him say that he didn't try to put any, try to like make it into something that it wasn't, because it was just, yeah.
I agree. I think like Lewis did a great job of sort of bouncing back. A difficult qualifying session, but the car looked actually reasonably strong in free practice 1 and a couple of the other practice sessions as well. It wasn't like that the car looked way off the mark, but once they got into qualifying, it just looked like this thing completely left the window. But I thought, they did as a team a nice job bouncing back. But again, this does affect them in that constructors championship. And then again, it also affects Lewis, who wants to get that second place in the driver's standings to finish, 6th, and Sergio Perez again finishing in front of him. So that points gap between those two is going to open up. And then you have Fernando Alonso scoring P2. That's going to allow him to close in on Sergio. So for Lewis wanting that P2, I mean, in the drivers championship, it's going to be tough, Dailey, but like I think as a team develops the car a little bit more, and again, I don't really know how much budget they actually have left to play with. They spent a lot to reconfigure this car, and I don't know. It could be tough for Lewis to try and get that second place in the drivers' standings. Lando Norris doing again incredible job in the McLaren. Really just dropped back though off the start. Just not a good start to the race for Lando.
Yeah, it was too bad because, when I saw the way that this was shaping up after qualifying and how good the McLarens looked once again, I was like, maybe, they have one good race. Okay, that's one good race, but they had a couple of good races before the summer break. They looked pretty legit during qualifying, and then everything kind of got turned upside down on its head. Lando coming home 7th, and then Piastri 9th. It's a double points finish. Obviously they'll be glad to get both cars into the points, but Lando, Oscar, Zach, everybody's just going to be thinking there. It's just like, oh boy, did we leave points and then some out on the track today, because this wasn't the way it was supposed to go. As much as George Russell was disappointed, obviously he retired at the end of the race there. As much as he was frustrated at the beginning of the race where he was, and ultimately he ended up, McLaren was obviously one of the big losers on the day as well. Yeah,
they were fast all weekend too. They brought the new rear wing to this car, and that's really unlocked a lot of potential with this race car. It has really come alive with this brand new rear wing that they decided to move forward for Zandvoort. It's really worked well. And coming out of the summer break, I wasn't really convinced about McLaren. I wasn't really convinced that, like, hey, this could be a team that, I could consistently see battling for that podium position at any point during the season, or continue to battle for a pole position. Lando made some mistakes on that push lap of his in quali. Potentially could have had pole as well if he had strung it together. I'm really surprised at just how far this team has come, because at the beginning of the season, Dailey, I was writing them off. I didn't think there was no way that this team was going to claw back as much performance as they have. And here we are, making me eat my own words, man. Damn it. And no, they've done a fantastic job. And this team, I think, is, I think it's for real. I think this is for real for sure.
Boy, have they ever done a great job. Very much like you after the first couple of races. I was very disappointed. I'm like, oh, these guys are going to be nowhere this year. They're the car just looks.
Felt like a 2-year project, right?
It did. I was just like, well, maybe they work hard at it. Maybe they'll be able to, they can get some double points finishes and things like that at the end of the year. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the year, it was just like, hey, where did these guys come from? This is great. And, it's exciting to watch because, to see how they've turned it around in a cost cap era where, it's, I'm not saying it's impossible, but, you just can't throw money at a problem and, fix it like you could, prior to the cost cap era, right? So to make the gains and the improvements that they've had, not just to be a team that was tooling around towards the back of the pack at the start of the year, to bring, cars into the points, but are now, they're like a legit threat, in the last, 3-4 races now. So that's exciting to watch. And that's one thing I try to tell the people is just like, okay, Max is going to win, Red Bull's going to win the constructors, but look at the other things that are going on with the other teams. Look at Aston Martin. Look at McLaren. If you're sort of enduring a bout of self-loathing and you want to sort of ruin your day, go and dive into the Ferrari story. Sure, that'll ruin anybody's day, make you all upset. But joking aside, the McLaren, it's impressive what they're doing. And, they got to be really keyed up for the last, 8 races a year now or whatever it is. I think they're eyeing a pretty good haul of points, and they could get them if they keep going the way they are.
Esteban Ocon scoring the final points paying position. Again, great day for Alpine, great results for them. Lance Stroll, P11, Nico Hülkenberg in P12 in the Haas. Haas bringing some new upgrades to this car too, to help them with their tire degradation throughout the race. And, not bad results from either driver throughout this race. Both were actually competitive and looking at points at some parts of this race. Hülkenberg P12, and then you had Magnussen, who got a penalty anyways and fell down to P16. But what have you made of Haas lately? They literally do look like they've started to just chip away at that race pace of theirs.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. They've also committed to bringing back K-Mag and Hülkenberg for next year. If they can develop a bit of a better car, I don't see why these guys couldn't score points on a more regular basis. Nico's only missing out on on a points finish by 2 places. So that's not bad. And at one point, K-Mag, he was running up there pretty good. I mean, where a lot of people got, like the pit stops wrong at the beginning of the race and, the ever-changing conditions, Kevin Magnussen and Haas actually got it spot on. But I mean, I think everybody went in for about 13 tire changes by the time this race was over. And I mean, ultimately, K-Mag finished well down there. I think he was P16 or something in the end of the race. But, certainly, I mean, there's some positives for them there.
I want to talk about Liam Lawson real quick before we move on to some other subjects. But Liam Lawson finishing P13. I did a social media post for SDPN on this, and I honestly, if you had gone back to Saturday and you told me that this guy was going to finish P13 in the conditions that we saw, I would never have believed you.
I think a lot of people would be at the exact same place.
No way.
I mean, what a great afternoon for him. Yeah,
really good,
yeah.
strong. I mean, and
Absolutely.
that's again, right? Lawson wants to prove that he belongs in Formula One and wants to show Red Bull Racing that he is worthy of a Formula One seat. With this result, beat Yuki Tsunoda. Obviously, Tsunoda got a time penalty as well, but beating his teammate Tsunoda, that's his first time in the car. Pretty good. Difficult conditions.
Exactly.
Pretty good.
Maybe he's that. I mean, it's only one race, so it's kind of really hard to tell. But I mean, that's a very solid result for somebody that hadn't been in that car before, like 3 days ago. Yeah. So I mean, that's great. But I mean, my one big issue with Yuki is that he seems to blow hot and cold. Right? There's a consistency issue, and he's not really like. I mean, this is his third year now in Formula One. I mean, he's been around for a little while, so I mean, some of these things need to settle down. I mean, the time penalty, and then of course he damaged it. Do we ever figure out in that contact with Lando, did that come off his car or off of Lando's? So
the damage that Yuki said he had, like he thought he had wing damage.
Yeah,
and the team ended up telling him like, no, the car's good. You're fine.
Yeah,
and so I think that that was the two of them making contact, obviously, but. For Tsunoda, I agree. I mean, sometimes you know what you're going to get from him. Sometimes you don't. I felt like in this race, he had some up and down. He drove a great first half of this race, and even into the second half, he was really good, man. Like I think strategy at the end of the day really let them down. Really let Yuki down. That's what I think. I honestly think that this guy could have been on for some points. Maybe not we're not talking like a ton of points. Maybe P9 or P10, but I think at the end of the day, strategy did play a factor, and then obviously we had the red flag. We had the heavy rain come down at the end there and the red flag and that whole situation. So kind of just ruined everything for Yuki at that moment. But he did have a nice first half to this one.
He was one of the ones that skated off into the gravel there at T1, didn't he? I mean, so did Lewis. So, I mean, it could happen to even the best of them. I mean, that's how bad it was. So, I mean, I'm not going to hold that against Yuki Tsunoda because that was pretty extreme, like a pretty nasty downpour there for a couple of minutes.
Good and bad weekend for Logan Sargent. Good in the sense that the delta between him and Alex was relatively close, wasn't as big as usual. And I think if he hadn't have had that crash, which is the bad part of it in qualifying, he probably would have been a little bit closer to Alex. I'm not thinking, I don't think he could have gotten up to P4 in qualifying, but I think he probably could have gotten a little higher, P7, P6 maybe. But again, I think with this, it's interesting to see just how fine the margins are with these cars in terms of just getting it wrong for the line. I mean, he was maybe a few feet off of turning in a little bit too late during his qualifying lap into that turn 2-3 section. Obviously, that's where he crashed. But just a little bit too late with the line, and that's enough to throw you into the wall. In the race, looked a little challenging for him. I heard from the team afterwards. And then for Logan, a big part of it was once he touched the curbing, he immediately suffered like a loss in hydraulics and power steering. And at the end of the day, when you lose those things in an F1 car, there's literally nothing you can do. You're a passenger at that moment. And I haven't really got to talk to you much about your thoughts on Logan this season. What have you made of his rookie campaign?
Yeah, it's been a rookie campaign, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
You know, you can tell, and I'm not trying to be cynical about that, but I mean, you can just tell that this is a young driver trying to learn Formula One, and you know, every weekend is something new for him. So he's continuing to evolve throughout the season, and he's had his moments, and he struggled at times, and I think that's I think that's fair to expect that from him at this point. I mean, the cynic in me would say today, oh, well, this weekend at Zandvoort, Logan Sargent drove his Formula One car like I do when I play the F1 video game. I spend more time in the gravel and in the tire wall. But I mean, when you unpack it, yeah, there's more things going on there. I mean, the conditions, and like you just so nicely explained. I mean, but it was very, like, there was a similar situation with George Russell, right? When he put that one tire onto the grass, he was able to save the car, and it just it's
that
incredible,
was a huge
right?
Save.
Yeah. That was massive. And I mean, but that was also at a bit of a different part of the track. Yes. And unfortunately for Logan, I mean, he put a wheel wrong, and then, everything, that kind of snowballed there and just puts it out. I mean, like, I felt bad for him because you saw him sitting there, like in the lawn chair there. He looked kind of dejected. He looked like somebody had like a pretty bad day. It's just like, just get me out of here. I just want to go home. Yeah.
Do you think he's back?
That's a great question, but I mean, like, who else would they bring in there? Because I mean, Formula One's different now. It's like, I really feel like the era of like the pay drivers are over. So it's not like they need like a huge amount of like sponsorship money, because we're in this cost cap era. I mean, obviously sponsorship money makes a difference, but like these drivers that we've seen in the past that were there only just because they brought like a really big portfolio and a big wallet with them for like money, he'll be back because he's, he brings a lot of money. But, like Logan now is just like, he's had like a pretty rough rookie season at times. So, but I just kind of like wonder who else would they put in there, like, or, and the thing is that Williams is kind of like, well, I mean, at least under Capito, they kind of like were a little bit more, weren't afraid to sort of stand up to Mercedes when they tried to like parachute in like a Mercedes person into there. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how cozy James is still with Brackley and with Toto, because you got to think that, James must think in the back of his mind that, maybe if Toto like, wants to call it quits one of these days, I want to put my name in for that job. Mm-hmm. And this is a really good job for me to have in the meantime. So, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I think maybe he comes back.
I think so.
I mean, they held on to Nicky for a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of think that, if they gave Nicky 2-3 seasons or whatever it is, maybe they do the same thing with Logan Sargent.
Yeah, I agree. Off track stuff.
Yes.
So I believe it was David Croft was came. I think it was on a podcast that he had said something about Lance Stroll, just going and playing tennis or something. Like he was just going to like quit F1 and go and play tennis or whatever. So one of the reporters like actually asked him about this, and what did he say? I got to pull up the quote here of what Lance actually had said to the reporter. I said, quote, "Well, if I'm going to go on tour, I'd better work on my backhand a little bit because I don't think I'm quite at that level."
Those are one of these things, like every once in a while, like, when I was covering Major League Soccer and like it's going to like a lot of pressers and things like that, every once in a while you get another reporter would go up and ask like a question, and you'd be sitting there, dude, did you just really? That's like the cringiest question I've heard in a while. Yeah. And like when I heard this story too, I was just like, if I was Lance, I would have been laughing to myself. I just like, really? This is the best question you could ask me today.
He handled it well, man. He was joking around with the guy, like pretty good, like joking around with the reporter, pretty good about it. So I think Like, yeah, he didn't care, I don't think, but like,
No.
I mean, just like, the guy, oh my God. Man. So 97% of spectators use sustainable transportation for this one, daily to get to the race. So 45,000 cyclists each day, and they were showing like aerial shots of the bicycle racks that are there, and there's thousands of bicycles. I was saying to my girlfriend, like, I don't know how anybody figures out which one their bike is. Like,
yeah, but that's part of the Dutch culture, because if you like when I lived there, like I would take the train or the bus to work, and what happens is if you like every train station or bus station, they'll have like bike lockers and like places where you can lock your bike up. So Dutch people are just used to that. It's just like, it's like if me or you go to Costco and it's like you got like this parking lot that's like 15 square hectares or something. It's like that. Most people are like, how are you going to find your car afterwards? It's the same thing for the Dutch. It's in the culture, but the cycling infrastructure is there as well, and it's so easy to get around. But I mean, 45,000 people, that is a lot,
right?
So I mean, for people to still find their bikes, afterwards, that's still pretty impressive, considering it's to begin with, it's ingrained in the culture. But that's impressive. There
was a tweet put out by Joe Pompliano, and he actually kind of encapsulates this whole sort of story. I'll read it to you here. He said, environmentalists tried to stop the Dutch Grand Prix from coming to Zandvoort for years. They said the event would endanger Zandvoort's dune reserve and counter its effort to fight climate change. So race organizers implemented a unique incentive-based system to combat littering. And he said, this is how it works. So when fans arrive at the track, they are given a token to exchange for a plastic cup when buying a drink. If you bring your plastic cup back when buying drink number 2, you are given another plastic cup in exchange. If not, you had to pay €1 for a new cup. So what about your last cup when you aren't getting another drink? When you bring your plastic cup back, you're handed a token with a code. You can enter online to win prizes. He said the results, 70,000 attendees leave no trash left behind. Race officials also close public roads into Zandvoort. That requires attendees to take public transportation or bikes to the race, like you and I were just discussing. The results, like we had mentioned, 98% of attendees traveling via bike or train, with just 2% coming via personal vehicle. When you look at like the landscape of sports as a whole, and obviously like Formula One is an interesting aspect of that, because you go to a racetrack, you're outside. There are hundreds of thousands of people who go to these races. I mean, you go to the Indy 500 and there's like almost 400,000 people there just for the one day. It's an interesting aspect, but when you look at other sports, I mean, North American, do you see something similar playing out here as well eventually?
I would hope so, because I mean, at least for you live in Toronto, I live in Vancouver. It's fairly easy to like hop on public transport. Like I can take the bus from my place down to the SkyTrain. I can SkyTrain it downtown if I want to go to a Canucks game, if I want to go to a concert, if I want to go to a football game, whatever, right? So it's handy. But what I think is really cool about this is, the infrastructure is there, but also the way that they incentivize things, like it's just like you get a token, you can exchange it for this, you can enter into draws for that. And I think that's a great thing, because, like I thought it was when we were talking about this before we went to air was, the one image came into my mind was last year, the year before, I forget which race it was. Remember Seb was in the grandstands afterwards, picking up empty trash, beer cocks and cups. I think it might have been in Austria, picking up trash and things like that. And this was the complete opposite to it. And, I guess, there's the argument you can make is, it's too bad people won't do it on their own. But it is interesting, like an interesting social experiment, what people will do. And those are pretty simple incentives to take advantage of. I mean, it's just like, it's like you get this token, this is your cup, bring it back, you get another one, they can recycle them, whatever it is, and then, or else you got to pay for it. And some people just won't care. You're going to get those people regardless. But I think that's, really, really interesting. I'm hoping that this is something we could see somewhere else, because I mean, we've all been to like a game or a concert or something, and afterwards the place literally looks like a bomb went off or a hurricane went through, because there's popcorn, there's beer, there's wrappers, and there's garbage everywhere and stuff like that. So, I thought this was really, really cool. I thought it was a really neat initiative by the organizers.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was too. That's why I decided to bring it up. I mean,
Yep.
One of the things I've noticed now going to quite a few of the F1 races is that, they don't, for the media center and that side of things, and then also inside the paddock and all that as well. I mean, there is no plastic. Like I've for the past 2 seasons now, there's either been cardboard drinking bottles or it's been aluminum drinking bottles. And there hasn't been any plastic. There's been like refill stations and things like that. And it's one of the things that, because I've obviously, been involved in the sport for so long, and then obviously covering it behind the scenes for a long time as well. I remember days where, going through plastic bottles like it was nobody's business, and now it doesn't even exist there. So they're changes that they are pushing hard to make, and I'm interested to see how this trickles down into either races and then other sporting events, especially over here on the North American side, because I thought it was a pretty cool initiative too.
Yeah, because it also sets a good example, because it's just like, you kind of think, okay, if these guys can do this for like a 3-day or 4-day like Formula One race weekend, like, why can't I do better at home? It's just like, why can't I take care of like my own mess at home and do something similar? So I think it's like, it's good leadership, and I think it's I think it sets a good example. So props to the Dutch Grand Prix organizers.
Let's head over to the debrief, and we will answer your questions from social media. From Parth Lad. I think this one's for you, Dailey.
Okay.
Regarding Ferrari. No. Do you think a lot of Ferrari's strategic woes are potentially due in part to using outdated strategy tools and technology? There are a lot of glaring strategic mishaps dating back to Vettel's challenge in 2018 that are hard to simply chalk up to human error, in my opinion, period. That's his question.
Yeah, probably. Nothing would surprise me anymore. It would explain why they got those computers on the Ferrari pit wall that seem to be running on Windows 2000 or something like that.
I don't necessarily think that is the case, because usually all of these teams get up to speed with technology pretty quickly. So I don't necessarily see that as being one of their issues. Patrick Sherman, apologies if I pronounced your name wrong. All right. If Verstappen manages to capture his 10th consecutive victory, where would you put this achievement in all-time Formula One moments? That's a great question.
Yeah, well, it's got to be right up there. I mean, it's something that's never been done before. And you look back at some of the greats over the years, your Schumachers, your Sennas, your whoever you want to throw in there, you're like, even throw like Fangio into there. I mean, it places him up there among the very, very best drivers in the world throughout history to do what he's done. I mean, it's as much as there's Max and Red Bull haters out there, but what he's doing is it's truly impressive.
I agree. I think if you look at, the body of work, and then, obviously, like, if he wins his 3rd championship, like, that puts him into, like, Ayrton Senna territory, right? Like, if we look at F1, world champions as a whole, and if you take a look at the list, Verstappen enters the conversation for some huge names for winning, 3 Formula One championships. Jack Brabham, Jackie Stewart, Niki Lauda, Nelson Piquet, Ayrton Senna, and then you're going to add Max Verstappen if he captures this 3rd driver's title. That's pretty impressive. And then obviously breaking the record for most wins in a row is huge. And then what happens if Red Bull can like run the table as well with all this, which I think they probably can, and they probably will. We're seeing a lot of incredible things right now, Dailey, and I don't see how you can't not put him in the conversation of the drivers that I just mentioned there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if they can go on to run the table and have the perfect season, then they can get together and have a party with the 72 Dolphins at the end of the year too. So you get an interesting crossover.
From Andrew, I just want to know who told George Russell that he was forecasted to finish on the podium. Mercedes better use another AI program.
yeah. Just because it was forecast to get on the podium doesn't mean like good. That was like an actual indication. You still had to go out there and do the work, George. But obviously he feels like he had the car to do it, so I can understand why he was cranky about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like obviously, the strategists run them through a few different scenarios before they start the race. If they lose a place, if they gain a place, right, where they have an idea of where they should end up if, they basically put the race together, right? And that's essentially what George is driving at that point. From Nick Ignatov, was that the best race of the year? It feels like it had everything. I don't know about you, Daly. I think so. Like I'm on that. I agree with that for sure.
Yeah, as nice as it is to get in and out of a race like in under 2 hours, the chaos that we saw, the red flag that delayed things by 40 minutes just to run, what was it, 7 or 8 laps at the end? It was absolutely the right decision. I mean, for safety, but also it might have kind of made a kind of a fun little shootout at the end there. And it was great. I mean, I was like, when we did our race preview on Thursday night, when I was looking at the weather, I was really hoping that like the moisture, the rain was going to come, because it just adds in that unpredictability. And I mean, to say that it was just a race with unpredictable moments, it is a bit of an understatement. I thought it was a great weekend. I thought it was a great race. I enjoyed every moment of it. Me
too. Like I said at the top, right? It's chaos, man, and I absolutely love it when we get a chaotic race, dude. I enjoyed the red flag moments of the fan, like just the fans in the stands. Like nobody left. Like they were getting dumped down on with rain, and it looked actually quite cold there. It was cool. Everybody was singing, dancing, cheering. I thought that was a really cool atmosphere. It's a race that I've wanted to go to now. I shouldn't say always wanted to go now for the past few seasons. We had planned to actually go to that one, and my girlfriend and I were going to go on a trip, and we were going to go to Iceland, and then we were going to go over to the Netherlands, and I was going to go work the Dutch Grand Prix, but we ended up doing the math and the calculations on all of it. It would have been a pretty expensive trip all around, so I ended up just choosing to do the British Grand Prix instead. And then for the two of us to plan to go somewhere in the wintertime, somewhere warm on a vacation then, because I haven't had one yet since last January. So, but that being said, I mean, that's a race I want to check out. I want to one day go to that Dutch Grand Prix. It looks incredible.
Yeah. And, of course, I'm a little bit biased because I come from a Dutch family. I mean, Dutch people are just awesome to begin with. And, they're super friendly. And I thought it was great, too, because I was looking at some of the stats there, too. Like, it was like 16 degrees Celsius when they stopped the race. So with the being on, the water there on the, with the rain, I mean, those people must have been cold. So, whoever thought of telling the DJ to go out there, play some music, get people dancing, that was absolutely, it was the right call to stop the race because of the weather. That was the right call to keep the fans warm because it really helped not only the atmosphere, but I'm sure it kept some people from getting hypothermia or something. I don't know. Well, maybe it wasn't that cold, but.
Daly, thanks very much for taking the time to do this. Man. Really appreciate it. Let everybody know where they can find you and what you've got going on.
So you can find me at Mark Dailey F1, and it's Dailey on X or Twitter or whatever it's called. And I'm part of the Scuderia F1 podcast, and you can find us on X or Twitter or whatever they call it at Scuderia F1 Pod. And we drop shows a couple times a week, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere Tim is, we're there too. And it was a blast, man. Always love coming on the show and doing this with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. If you want more Nailing the Apex, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube now. Please head over to Spotify, give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same goes with Apple Podcasts. Write a review if you could. It really helps us grow the show. I'm Tim Hauraney. You can get me on social media at Tim Hauraney. We will be back later this week 4, some more Formula 1 and racing news. Talk to you later.